And this segment, called Martial Law, is intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law constantly changes. The information may not be complete or correct depending on the date and your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of that, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. I know one of those. He's right across the microphone from me. He is Marshall Chriswell. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you with us here this morning.
Nice to be here.
Talk about something. It's getting to that time of the year when we see a lot of real estate transactions coming forward. And people might say to themselves, well, real estate is just like any other type of sale. It's like going out and buying a car. It's like going out and buying groceries. You just go, you give money, and they give you, in this case, property. It's not quite that simple, is it?
No, it's really not. And when you think about it, buying a home or some other real estate transaction, for regular folks, it's pretty much probably going to be the largest legal transaction that you're ever going to be involved in. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that you seek legal representation, whether you're buying, you're selling, you're refinancing, any type of real estate transaction, because it really is complicated.
All right. So from your standpoint, what are the types of things and maybe some of the issues as well that you deal with as an attorney when it comes to real estate transactions?
Sure. So I handle all sorts of transactions. You mentioned home buying, selling a home. I do that. Commercial properties, rental properties, camp properties, hunting properties, all sorts of real estate transactions. And I also handle transactions. Whether there's a real estate agent involved, or multiple agents, whether there's a bank involved, whether the property is being financed, if it's a cash transaction for sale by owner, all, really my practice runs the gamut of all different types of transactions. And so I see it all. Mm-hmm. I think that people really do, to your point, kind of take for granted the complex nature of these transactions. It's not like buying a car. You go and you buy a car, and it's very easy to tell if that car, if it has a lien on it, because they have to be registered with the state, and it's simple to check on that. It's you take it to a mechanic, you have it looked over, and you can spend a lot of money on a car, but this isn't a house, and it's not something you're going to be living with for the rest of your life, and or selling down the road and dealing with issues that of conveying good title and a good property later on. So it is a much more complicated deal.
Yeah. There are terms that can be intimidating, and maybe we don't think of them in that circumstance, but the simple term closing. The closing is this week. People might not know what that means. What are the ABCs of real estate transactions?
Sure. The first step, obviously, once you've identified a property. So let's do it from a buyer's perspective. You've identified a property. And you're interested in it, so you need to make an offer. And people don't know, right? You don't know what that means, right? How do you do that? Can you do that over the phone, orally? Can you do it in an email? The best way to do that is in writing, and setting forth very specific terms, whether it's presenting the seller with a proposed sales contract or putting together a written offer. So once you have an offer and there's some negotiation and the offer has been accepted, then normally you move into the contingency process. Okay, most real estate transactions have contingencies. A contingency for inspections, for example. The buyer is going to have the opportunity to have certain inspections performed in some cases. Home inspections, septic, radon inspection. Even a survey, boundary inspections, those kinds of things. There are also mortgage contingencies. The buyer is going to apply for a mortgage. Perhaps they can't get the financing. If you have a good mortgage contingency in the sales agreement, if it's being negotiated in there, then the buyer is going to be able to say, well, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the financing, or the property didn't appraise for the correct amount, enough for me to get the financing for the sale. So I'm going to be able to walk away and not lose any deposit money that I've put down. Those kinds of things. So you've got those contingencies. Once all the contingencies are met, we're generally ready to move to closing. Mm-hmm. People have in their mind, I think, a closing where everybody, the buyer and the seller and all the attorneys and the real estate agents and everybody sit down at one table and everybody signs and the keys are handed over and all that. And usually modern closings, that's not the way it works. Generally, the sellers will meet with their representation, review all their documents, sign them, and then the buyers will, sellers will send the documents over to the buyers, and they meet separately with their representation and review things and sign off. So it's normally not, and we do that for convenience, so we don't have to get everybody together at the same time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and then once the closing occurs, then documents are recorded generally by the attorney for the buyer, ensuring that the records, county records, are updated, tax records, those things. So that's the process. And where the attorney is most helpful is in examining the title to the real estate. Mm-hmm. That's one of our biggest jobs. We do the closing documents, conduct closings and things, but our biggest job is to examine the title to the real estate and determine whether the buyer is getting good title, and if not, what has to be done by the seller to fix it before closing.
All right. Yeah, that's very, very important. There are certain pieces of property where there will be restrictions. For instance, you're buying a farm, and it is restricted as to the use in a particular township. That can be one type of restriction. There are others. Mineral rights have to be considered, gas rights, those sorts of things. I would assume the attorney plays a vital role in researching just what comes attached to any particular property as well.
Absolutely. And this is where it's really important to have an attorney. And I keep saying that, and I want to explain. So in Pennsylvania, you don't, and I'll take it from a buyer's perspective again, you don't have to be represented by an attorney in a real estate transaction. And often, if you have a bank or a real estate agent involved, they may recommend to you, at some point the question is going to arise, are you going to be represented by an attorney, or how do you want to handle closing? They may recommend that you use something called a settlement company or a title company, mm-hmm. As opposed to an attorney. What you just mentioned is one really good reason why you want to have an attorney involved. When I review title to a property, I am going to prepare a detailed title certification letter to the buyer, and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about that. And it's going to include, okay, how is this property zoned? What are the acceptable uses? Are there setback lines? Are there restrictions such as, are there right-of-ways across the property that's going to burden that property during your ownership? Are there restrictive covenants? Building restrictions? There can be all kinds of things on the record that a title company, if you're using a settlement company, title company, same thing, they generally, or they don't, represent you for a legal purpose. They only are hired to prepare closing documents and ensure that a title insurance company will provide title insurance. That's it. They don't represent you. You have no legal representation, again, in what generally is the largest legal transaction of someone's life. Mm-hmm. So it's that is one of the biggest roles of an attorney in these transactions is, again, reviewing title and giving the buyer notice prior to closing, saying, okay, this is what you're dealing with if you buy this property. And sometimes it's a defect in the title that we need to go back and have the seller cure that at their expense. Maybe there's an old mortgage on the property that was accidentally never satisfied, still operates as a lien. Maybe there is a gap in the chain of title. Can be all kinds of problems. So, and we can sit down, I can sit down with a buyer and say, okay, do you want to take the risk on this, or do we want to have it fixed before closing? And so it's really important.
Generally, we've been talking from the buyer's perspective. From the seller's perspective, representation is equally important, is it?
Absolutely. You are conveying title to the buyer, and any good sales agreement is going to require the seller to convey good title. So if something happens that the seller's deed is drafted incorrectly, or there is a title issue that you are aware of, and you still deed the property over to the buyer, it can cause a lot of liability for the seller. So having an attorney on your side as the seller representing your interests is very helpful, because the attorney can then draft the deed, deal with any title issues, any issues that come up during the transaction, even things as simple as something comes up on the inspection that needs to be fixed, and we need to create an addendum to the sales contract and adjust the purchase price. A settlement company, if you've hired a settlement company, again, not an attorney generally, aren't going to be able to do those things. So you may end up needing a lawyer anyway. Yeah. So from a seller's perspective, very important as well.
I would expect that there are people out there who do this a lot, who sell a lot of property, buy a lot of property, and we know that there are people out there like that. But for most people, it's a once or twice in a lifetime experience.
Right.
And especially if you're if you're in that boat, whether you are a buyer or a seller, that attorney is going to be the one that says, okay, these issues over here you haven't thought of because you just don't have that sort of experience. So we need to handle this, and then we need to come over here and handle this. It's sort of walking them through, guiding them through the whole process.
Yes, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's where an attorney, someone who is experienced in real estate transactions, who deals with these contracts, these transactions all the time, is going to be invaluable.
Absolutely. Okay, so someone wants to get in touch with you and use your services for those purposes. What do they need to do?
You can always stop by the Atrium building and see me at my office. Call me at 724-465-5826 or go online to www.westernpalawyer.com.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Todd.
There's Marshall Chriswell with us this morning.